Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar, Supply Chain Management, Where is its value and where does talent fit in it? Welcome to the webinar. We're thrilled you're here. I'm your host, Hannah Kennedy Oates, and on behalf of ISSA, I welcome you. Presenting this timely and relevant information are Drs. Marko Bastl and Mark Barratt of Marquette University's Supply Chain Management Program, and Chris Adams, Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Fresh Products. We have a few housekeeping items to go over before we get started today. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. Feel free to type your questions in the chat box that is available to you on your screen. You can send them to us throughout the presentation. We will be monitoring those, so we'll be ready to answer those at the very end. You will also receive a copy of the presentation when this is over. We'll be sending an email out to everyone who's attended with a copy, so don't worry if you're taking notes and you miss something, you'll be able to receive the recording. And now about our presenters. Dr. Mark Barratt joined the Department of Management as an Associate Professor in Supply Chain Management in January 2013. He earned his undergraduate degree in Operations Management from the University of Greenwich, United Kingdom, and a doctorate in Supply Chain Management from Cranfield University, United Kingdom. Before joining Marquette University, he was an assistant professor in Supply Chain Management at the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University, where he taught logistics, global supply chain management, and supply chain strategy. Dr. Barratt's research and teaching interests are addressing some of the most topical and critical questions in supply chain management practice and theory. These include, for example, how to effectively manage on-shelf availability, how to effectively achieve supply chain visibility, how to effectively achieve supply chain collaboration, just to name a few. Dr. Bastl joined Department of Management in August 2013. Prior to joining Marquette University, he worked as a Senior Research Fellow in Supply Chain Research Center in Cranfield School of Management in the United Kingdom. Dr. Bastl has well over 20 years of executive and academic experience. Prior to joining academia, he held various executive positions, last being head of corporate, financial, and operational controlling and paper manufacturing business. Dr. Bastl's research and teaching interests are addressing some of the most topical and critical questions in supply chain management practice and theory. These include, for example, how to effectively manage multi-tier inter-firm relationships, how to effectively exit from buyer-supplier relationships, and how to achieve supply chain transparency, just to name a few. And finally, Chris Adams. He's the current Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Fresh Products. He has had over 30 years of experience in this industry, carrying multiple lead roles, including National Account Manager at Gojo. He was involved in the launch of PRL and has led multiple initiatives with Legas. Also has had a lead role with Network Services, and you can find his extremely valuable insights in the Harvard Business Review. He has had the opportunity to work for the #1 manufacturer in the nation, the #1 distributor in the nation, and the #1 wholesaler in the nation throughout his extensive career in this industry. Without further ado, please welcome our presenters. Thank you, gentlemen.
Hannah, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. My name is Marko Bastl, and I'll open today's webinar. Before we actually start diving into the actual content, let me just quickly tell you what we're going to talk today about. I'll open at the beginning with a little bit of reflection on what do we think, what supply chain management is, and why it is so important. And the reason we are doing this is because we didn't know actually really what kind of audience we're going to have, what's the maturity of the knowledge that we have currently in the audience. So it's always kind of good before we actually dive into a little bit more deeper and complex issues to have a little bit of that, establish a baseline. So I'll cover that part, and then I'll talk about a little bit more macro aspects of the critical issues in supply chain management. And then Chris Adams is going to join me. He's going to talk about the specific distributor-related issues that they're facing. Mark Barratt will then cover the core of this presentation, which is around why is talent so important these days and why should be on the top of your priority list to think about it. And we'll then close with the introduction of the supply chain fundamentals course, which we have developed jointly with ISSA. So we have roughly 10 minutes for each section, and we're going to then leave another 10 or 15 minutes open for your questions. So let's try to answer a couple of questions now around what is actually supply chain, because probably you're reading about it every week in the business literature. So I've been personally involved in many executive development workshops, courses, and so on. And normally, the way we start this sort of engagement is we would ask executives, hey, why don't you pick maybe like a product line from your company? This, for example, last week we were doing this on the example of a bicycle or a coffee cup, or maybe if you're a water bottler, why don't we do this on the example of bottled water, or maybe a cleaning products if you're a distributor. And let's map your supply chain to see how far do you see and what do you think what supply chain is, what supply chain management is, and why it's important. And every single time we get kind of like a variety of answers, depending whom do you ask. So procurers normally see a little bit better upstream towards the supply network. Then supply chain managers have some understanding also of the customer side, same as logistics. But what actually happens every single time, there are kind of like two converging answers or two converging insights. When we talk about what supply chain actually is, almost no one has actually visibility and understanding of the entire supply chain. And here I'm not talking about the end-to-end, I'm talking about the scope, let's say one tier upstream towards supply network, or one or two tiers downstream or towards the customer base. The second converging answer is also when we ask about, hey, why do you think what supply chain management is important? Overwhelmingly, the focus is on efficiency. So the role of supply chain is still believed to be around cost minimization, and hopefully today we'll demonstrate that this view is actually too narrow to compete in today's environment, and that really to effectively manage a supply chain, one has to understand the influences that individuals' decisions have not only on other functions in the company, but also on other stakeholders in the supply chain, which are, for example, your suppliers and your customers. So traditionally, if we go back to early 80s, when supply chain and supply chain management as term were coined, we normally illustrate supply chain as kind of like as a linear chain of connected companies. And in this example over here, we have distributor or manufacturer in the center. Is that connected with the multiple tiers of suppliers upstream and the customers downstream? And there are kind of three flows that supply chain managers and people involved in managing supply chains were ought to manage. First one is a physical flow of raw materials, parts, components, and finished products. Then you have informations that are flowing from the market, from the customer side upstream towards the supplier. Then you have funds, and then it's another flow, which is the return flow of products due to the consumer returns, recycling, warranties, and so on. However, if you have ever been involved in any exercise, for example, risk management exercise, when you have to identify where the key risks in your supply network, you very soon realize that supply chain to depict it in such kind of linear way is oversimplification. What we are essentially dealing is a complex network of connected companies. And we define supply chain as a network of connected and interdependent organizations which are mutually and cooperatively working together to control, manage, and improve the flow of materials and information from a supplier to the end users. Now, building on that, we define supply chain management as the management of upstream and downstream activities, downstream relationships, with suppliers and customers in order to deliver a superior customer value at less costs to the supply chain as a whole. Now, I would suggest here that that we can rename, there's almost need to rename supply chain management into demand management, so that we don't confuse that our supply chains are actually supplier driven. They should absolutely be customer driven, driven by the demand and the customer needs that we are trying to serve. So all our decisions regarding, all the decisions that fall under the umbrella of supply chain management, from the capacity decisions to the location of your distribution centers, the configuration of your distribution network, to the configuration of your supply network, where are your suppliers, with whom do you work, what kind of relationships you build with them, should be actually driven by the demand and the market characteristics that you are actually trying to satisfy. Now, to answer why supply chain management important, let me bring you back to beginning of 1980s, when Michael Porter published the book on the competitive advantage. And what Michael Porter was arguing at that time was, look, you can really compete in two ways. You can be either a cost leader. So here you see this bottom left quadrant where it says cost leader, meaning that you are operating in the low cost environment. You have a cost advantage. Or you can be a service leader, meaning that you differentiate yourself from the competition based on the superior costs or services that you're providing. Now, particularly in the last decade, what we are seeing that the position that is by far the most difficult to imitate by competitors is the one in the upper right quadrant, where companies are not only trying to provide customers with a superior service provisions, but also doing this in a cost controlling way. So they're trying to combine actually the both aspects of the competition. Now, and to do this, right, in the heart, the enabler in the center of this journey towards that upper right quadrant is really supply chain management. And we see this on our side by working with the local companies, by the recruiters, all the people who are coming to us and working with us in the collaborative fashion. They're constantly repeating supply chain management is really something we have to figure out. And supply chain management, to extend what I said earlier, that still many companies think that is just about actually saving costs. Supply chain management is actually enabling companies not only to save costs, but also to provide a superior value to the customers. So through things such as customized service, increased reliability, increased levels of perfect order fulfillment, better responsiveness, and on the cost side, through increase in the manufacturing capacity utilization, better inventory turnovers, minimization of, for example, things such as safety stock, asset utilization, and consolidation of supply base, if I name just a few. Now, let's go now and enter then the second part, which is around these critical issues in supply chain management and what companies are actually struggling with in today's times. So I'll take a step back over here and I'll give a little bit of a macro overview of what we see, what's actually happening in the competitive environment. There are like 5 things that I want to emphasize over here. The first thing is the collapsing product and technology life cycles. So if we look at in the previous century, it took roughly 58 years to transition from a phone with an analog rotational dial to the phone with a digital button keypad, right? Now, iPhone was released in 2007. Now it's 2019, and in this time, they have essentially released a new phone, either a completely new phone or the upgrade every single year. So what we are seeing that the life cycles of our products And technological life cycles are actually getting shorter and shorter, which is putting more and more pressure on companies to innovate. And the big pool of innovation these days is actually supply chain, are your suppliers, because your products and services are becoming so complex that very seldomly companies can actually execute and effectively innovate in the isolation from the companies that are collaborating with. The second thing that we are seeing, of course, is globalization of supply chains. And with the surge of outsourcing that started end of 70s, boomed through 80s and 90s and early 2000s, what we are seeing that some of these decisions were way too narrow. And the reason for this is that when you start globalizing your supply chain, you are technically extending it. And the longer your supply chain is, the longer your lead times are. The longer your lead times are, you're more prone to disruptions and you're less responsive. Now, if you look at what's happening on the customer side with the new generations of consumers, we want things now. So Amazon just a couple of weeks ago announced new delivery standard for the Prime account holders, which is 1 day free, right? For a couple of years was 2 day free, now is 1 day free. Now, if you have a really long supply chain with a long lead time, you are going in the directly opposite direction where actually your consumers want you. So that's something to really be careful about, and lead times are often a forgotten performance metric of supply chains. Then what we also see is the increasing supply chain vulnerability due to things such as, I mentioned earlier, outsourcing, overemphasis on the cost reduction, concentrated manufacturing and distribution, and in recent years also environmental influences and the changes in the climate that are causing all sorts of extreme weather conditions. And the last thing that we are observing is the uncertainty in the regulatory and sustainability pressures, which overall in aggregate creates the environment which is uncertain, it's volatile, it's constantly changing, it's complex, and requires firms today to be flexible and responsive while maintaining cost leadership, which comes back to what I was arguing earlier when I was showing that 2x2 diagram. So with that, I'm going to conclude for now my section. I'll hand over to Chris Adams, and he's going to talk now about the distributor-related issues and what he sees in the distribution market.
Yeah, thanks, Marko. Great job. So for the benefit of everybody on the phone, just a couple of things. Number one, just to give, for those that don't know us, Fresh Products is a mid-tier manufacturer. We're located in Northwest Ohio. We manufacture fragrance products. A number of you may be purchasing from us today. And as described earlier in the introductions, I've been in our industry in the Jansan space for about 30 years at a very senior role. So I've had many of the things that Marko was describing relative to supply chain and supply chain excellence. I've had the privilege of applying these principles in our business for a long time to significant value and benefit for the organizations I've worked for in the past. So it was really interesting when I came on board here at Fresh. One of the things that was very clear, I've been here for about 18 months, was very clear to me, is that obviously we have to be a customer-driven organization, as most suppliers need to be in our space. And we wanted to innovate on two fronts. We wanted to innovate relative to our products, again, because we are a manufacturer. And the second thing was that we had to innovate against our supply chain processes. And that meant a higher level of transparency and some other things that we weren't executing against. And the ownership, the president of our company and myself recognized the need to do that. Ultimately, as Marko said so well, this is a customer-driven initiative, and many of the things that are happening relative to the consumer that we're servicing and distributors that we're servicing are changing dynamically. And we recognized quickly that we had to make some changes internally with the organization. So with that said, there's some critical issues that we've uncovered and that we're applying resources against with our business. And they can be broken out in really three different areas. And I'll go through those in some detail. But one is really around talent acquisition. And that's really the ability for us to certify, train, acquire talent that can play in the supply chain arena. And it doesn't mean just kind of a longitudinal, a binary view of what supply chain is, because it's no longer just procurement. There's some multi-dimensions to this, as Marko had described, and I'll go through that in a minute. The second thing is a deeper level of transparency. We have to have more visibility in our supply chain, and the third part is around data analytics and capabilities. So I'm going to roll back up and just talk a bit about supply chain talent acquisition and retention. In today's environment, number one, we all know, for those of you that are trying to acquire supply chain talent, it's very difficult to do that. It's in high demand, and if you think about all the different connections that supply chain has, whether it's suppliers or consumers, all the way from hospitals to distribution, high demand, very hard to acquire the talent. And we recognized quickly that we wanted to embed some of that training within our organization, and we've started to do that. That included training and certification, some of the upgraded process, some of the things that we knew we had to focus on that we haven't been, including, again, as Marko outlined, risk mitigation strategies, just some standard procurement training that we didn't have as part of our training mechanism here at Fresh. So we've gone about with a significant ramp up relative to our training and certification, working with Marquette and making sure that the people that we have on staff understand the importance of what we're talking about when we talk about supply chain management. The other thing that was really driving this for us and driving a change with the organization is the need for agility and clear understanding of consumer service requirements. Marko again said it so well, but the challenge that we have as an organization, we're getting requests for drop ships, we're getting requests for next day delivery, we're getting requests for insights on our service level, all of those things which we didn't have before, and now we're developing. And that's all driven by consumers and distribution. And it's incredibly important that we can innovate. We have the opportunity to innovate in that space. And that's meant for us significant growth. And along those same lines, there's a requirement today relative to deeper access and transparency to supply chain activities. And without going into a lot of detail, that really associates itself with how do you manage costs within supply chain, and that includes shipping, expediting, e-commerce connectivity. And what we found when we started to do a forensic into that part of our business, we found that there was a lot of dollars that we were throwing away because we didn't have that level of transparency that was required. And the interesting thing was that our customers, distributors, and consumers were pushing us for more transparency because they needed that to make sure that they weren't betraying any performance covenants that they had with their customers. And a couple of additional things here, then competitive value chains to offset margin compression. For the manufacturers in our space, including distribution, margin compression is always a topic of conversation. It's been a topic for just about as long as I've been in the business, and margins are being compressed at an exponential level. And the offset for us, outside of product innovation, is our ability to have transparency and focus on efficiencies in the value chain and supply chain. And more than anything else, for us, it's had a significant impact on our EBIT because of the way we're managing the supply chain and integrating many of the concepts that Marko described with some of our key distributors. And then finally, data analytic capabilities and cross-functional understanding of supply chain. So it's not only about creating a level of transparency and then certainly training the folks that you have on staff for acquiring that, but what was most important for us is the fact that we wanted to develop a common language relative to supply chain and develop one version of the truth that we could share with our distributors and with our customers. And by doing that, it creates a level of kind of a common focus and set of goals that allows us to focus on certain things that we can impact, helps our distributors to focus on the things that they can impact. And through all of that, we gain share and we provide savings. And it's meant a seismic shift relative to our overall performance with our customers. And I mentioned just a few basic things that we've done relative to metric development. There's the internal side, which means linking our operations, our procurement staff, our expediting folks, our IT folks, and sales and marketing into this, what we would call a scorecard or a balanced scorecard relative to our performance. And now what we've done is we've cascaded that down into some of our key customers, providing them an opportunity to see how we operate and then giving them a voice and feedback to us whether or not we're meeting their requirements. And through that activity, we found significant cost savings. We've embedded ourselves, we've coupled ourselves to the success of those organizations. It's meant it's had a significant impact on our financials. So in my humble view, there is nothing more important in our industry these days, particularly the way we look at our omni-channel, than developing a mature supply chain practice, which would include the acquisition of talent, training, certifying talent, creating a level of transparency in the supply chain activities, and then linking all of that through data capabilities, linking that to the customers and your distributors and customers, and doing that under the guise of data analytics and scorecarding. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Marko.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So this is Mark Barratt. I wanted to spend a few minutes really delving deeper into why talent should be at the top of everyone's priority list. Unfortunately, while organizations seem to recognize the talent problem, when we look at what they're actually doing in terms of what they're investing in, talent drops out of the top 5. We have some numbers for you, and unfortunately, it makes for some pretty scary kind of reading. So if we kind of look at just 4 kind of real issues that are behind this kind of era of disruption that we're kind of living in, that these are things that we really need to take into account. So the first one is around demographics and succession planning, and we'll talk about demographics in just a second on the next slide. In terms of succession planning, one of the issues that we see is that really, companies, when they look at human capital investment, they really kind of see it as a liability instead of actually seeing it as an asset in terms of what the skills people can actually bring to their organizations. In terms of the changing market and customer requirements, as Marko kind of started to talk about, due largely to kind of the Amazon effect, consumers want what they want, when they want it, and where they want it. And this is making life a lot more difficult for organizations in terms of providing that level of service to those consumers. The third one is really around the inability to implement emerging technologies. So if we look at Industry 4.0, in terms of some of the technologies there, artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing, and business analytics, what we often see is that firms are implementing one of these technologies instead of looking at really the convergence that's happening across all of these different technologies in terms of what we can actually do by actually integrating all of these technologies and not just implementing one of them. And then last but not least, we have the inability to attract, develop, and retain top talent. Now, we often hear about people talking about the millennial effect, but we kind of have to go further than that. And the next generation, Gen Z, are even more of a mystery in terms of what they're looking for their work and for their career, and even for their work-life balance. Now, if we kind of dig deeper into the kind of demographic issue, if we look at the US population by age and by generation, we start to see some kind of interesting kind of trends. At one end, we have the number of baby boomers that are retiring from the workforce. And this is where the problem starts. The number of Gen Z entering the workforce is on average 500,000 per year less over the next, each year for the next 10 years, less than the number of baby boomers that are retiring. So this creates kind of a significant problem. And that is, and this is from a report from the World Economic Forum talking about the future of jobs. They're predicting that 54%, just kind of getting my notes out of order here. What we've got is over the next 10 years is we have a situation where there are going to be more than 5 million people exiting the workforce than will actually be joining the workforce. So, the next 10 years, it looks a pretty bleak picture in terms of getting hold of supply chain talent. By 2022, unfortunately, the prediction from the World Economic Forum is that they're predicting that 54% of all employees will require significant, and when they say significant, they're talking about more than 400 hours per year of training for upskilling, which is really looking at improving their existing skills, reskilling, which is about training people with new existing skills, and a new term, new skilling, which is training people for the skills that currently don't even exist. For example, how do we train people to work with the kind of growing deployment of automation with artificial intelligence and machine learning? So the World Economic Forum also identified a number of critical skills that we need to see in our workforce. So they talk about can people work collaboratively, whether that's inside the organization or with our customers or our suppliers. They talk about creative and critical thinking. Can our employees effectively communicate? What's their level of emotional intelligence? Do they have cognitive flexibility? So can they actually think across a number of different topics and be able to move from one to the other very quickly? Are they able to, solve complex problems? And, what's their level of judgment and decision making? Now, I'd ask you to just think about this for a second. How many of your employees have all of these skills? And if not, what are you going to do about it? With the talent gap, unfortunately, we cannot simply just go out and hire new people. So what we're kind of seeing, if we kind of focus this more now just to supply chain management, by 2025, the retirement of supply chain personnel is expected to increase dramatically. So a large percentage of the 5 million talent gap that we mentioned are likely to come from supply chain management. So some other kind of just some thoughts on this. So while we're talking about just the next 5 years, let me just kind of think about what's currently happening within supply chain. Now, we kind of have a quote from Jake Barr, who's actually the former senior VP for supply chain management for Procter & Gamble. And he suggested that for every graduate with supply chain skills, there are 6 further job opportunities that still need to be filled. And unfortunately, as we kind of move further into the future, this ratio increases to 9 to 1. The World Economic Forum also found that 60% of organizations, so that's over 500 of the largest employers in the world, the average time that it takes to fill a supply chain role is 5 months. 42% of organizations have no clear talent management strategy to support their strategy over the next 3 years. And whilst there is some good news, it's only that there are 18% of organizations that actually do have a clear talent management strategy to address their supply chain talent gap.
So in response to that, I'll talk a little bit about the course that we have designed jointly with ISSA and our Center for Supply Chain Management. So about 2 years ago, when we started talking about it, then Mark and I went down to Chicago to one of the ISSA biggest trade fairs to interview a bunch of companies of different sizes in order to get the insight. What are some of the key issues that they are dealing with? Because we had the indication from ISSA, hey, supply chain education, we believe, is actually really important for our members. All market indicators are pointing towards A, you need a skill, and B, you cannot easily acquire it from the job market. So another way forward is actually that you are starting upskilling and reskilling the labor force that you are already having in your companies. And after all the interviews, when we consolidated all the data, we then put like a straw man together, the basic structure, and we started developing the course that I'm going to introduce now. So really the purpose of this course, so this is fully online course, was actually first to build the awareness of understanding of supply chain management and what kind of effects it has on the firm's performance. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier at the beginning, at the opening, when you ask managers, hey, why do you think supply chain management is actually important? And you get really these diverse answers. And also what we, as I said, what we see is actually there's relatively poor internal and external visibility and integration between the companies. With this course, we are trying to bridge that. We want to increase the understanding of the role of the individual person in the wider supply chain management context. So, for example, if I make a decision, what kind of implications this decision is going to have for the rest of my organization, for other functions, right, or for the customers, or for the suppliers, or if suppliers, for example, let's say, extend their payment terms or extend the lead times, what kind of implications that's going to have for our company, and ultimately for the customers we are trying to serve. So ultimately, we designed the course around that integrative logic. As Mark and I will show you in about 30 to 45 seconds, we start with the customers, right? And then we build backwards. But we designed the course in a way that it's actually connected, that all modules are actually connected together, so that whoever goes through the course gets that integrated perspective of how these puzzles actually work together. We'll show you now the course structure. I will hand over for a couple of seconds to Mark, because he was the architect of the first couple of modules, and we'll start here with the customer service, which is module 1.
Okay, so thanks, Marko. So within the customer service module, what we're really trying to do is actually get people to understand one of the problems that we frequently see with customer service, and that is that firms often assume, based on prior experience, what their customers actually want. So we're trying to really get people to understand the need to actually interact with our customers to really closely and accurately understand what they're looking for in terms of customer service. Then in terms of logistics, what we've tried to do here is really cover the whole breadth of kind of logistics in terms of looking at what logistics is about, looking at the role of kind of warehousing, looking at the role of transportation, and the need just within logistics to take an integrated kind of perspective in this area. Then on the third module, we look at supply chain planning. And again, following this kind of integrative theme, we're looking at how organizations need to really focus on aligning what they're doing on the supply side of their business with the downstream facing demand side of their business.
Yes, then inventory management dives into the basics of inventory management, introduces the students to different types of inventory, and we kind of shy away a little bit from the accounting aspects of inventory, and we focus more on the operational aspects in terms of the transit inventory, cycle inventory, anticipation inventory, and so on, because we build on that and we introduce various different aspects and approaches how to reduce the inventory, because as we know from practice, almost universally, all companies that are carrying inventory are under constant pressure actually to reduce it. So students will learn the basics of inventory performance measurement, how to do a simple APC analysis and apply it, and then also how to make decisions around ordering quantities, lead time implications, safety stock implication, and so on. Then we have 2 modules related to purchasing and supply management. The module 5 is dedicated to a little bit more analytical side. So we start with spend analysis, which is the most fundamental analysis to understand where your money is going, and with whom you are doing the most business, where do you have riskier supply network. And then we teach students how to segment suppliers, because not all suppliers are equally important, and it's important that you distinguish between more important and less important, and how you're going to dedicate the resources to manage them. We talk about the supplier selection, and then in the next module on purchasing and supply management. Then we also talk a little bit about the supply risk management. We apply the supply segmentation then in practice, and both modules are kind of integrated in a way, and the central topic of it is designing the sourcing strategies. And then with the last and the seventh module, which is titled supply chain enablement, we kind of tie things together, and we talk a little bit about collaboration and goal alignment and some of the key learning points that we have that we see, for example, in the industry, particularly like mistakes that companies are actually making in collaborating with their external and internal parties, and how to fix them. Now, the course is designed on the principles of very interactive content delivery. So although it's fully online, it combines various different forms of content delivery. These are voice over PowerPoints. We have multiple interviews with the industry experts, which are providing like an industry perspective on a particular topic that is being discussed. Then we have several pre-recorded video recorded lectures, and as well as exercises and application of tools and frameworks in practice. Altogether, we have for around 14 hours of video material, which then require from a student normally around 20 hours additional self-study in order to really comprehend and learn and understand the content. Altogether, we cover around 42 topics through the 7 modules that we just described, and 40 plus quizzes for testing the acquired learning. At the end, every student also gets a certificate of completion, which is signed by ISSA and Marquette University, our Center for Supply Chain Management. Now, the key audience for this course are predominantly early career professional from various business functions across companies, from purchasing, logistics, operations, sales, and marketing, as well as middle management, or anyone who, for example, was for a longer period of time in a relatively narrow part of a supply chain management and wants to build a more comprehensive and integrated understanding of actually how supply chain management works and how his or her decision making is actually impacting the performance of a company and supply chain as a whole. Now, if you want to learn more regarding the pricing, discounts, and so on, and the enrollment process, there are 2 contacts at ISSA that you can contact, TJ Grimm and Mark Warner. But I was told yesterday that you should really keep an eye on the follow-up email from ISSA, which is going to follow after this webinar, because it's going to contain some discounts for the participating people, and also timings for how long these discounts are going to be valid. So with this, I would like to again thank you for the participation. Thank you for keeping up with us and for listening what we had to say today. And I would like to open to any questions, and so over to our audience, Hannah, now.
Wow, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation full of great information for our attendees. We do have a question from an attendee asking, is this course available online?
Yes, it's available online for ISSA members. It is fully online. I believe the link is going to be provided. In the email that's going to follow up. Also, if you go to the ISSA's website and you browse through their online education that you're offering, I think it's going to be one of the first offering there. And it's very easy then to access. Just click the link, it's going to take you straight to the enrollment site.
Excellent. Another question we have from an attendee is, why should I sign up for this program?
Okay, so I think probably one of the key things here is, and we mentioned this during the presentation, is that if we're really going to be effective with what we're doing with supply chain management, is we have to balance the demand side, and we have to trying to align what we're doing on the supply side. So the program is really designed around giving you this integrated perspective, and that's a significant kind of step forward in helping you to, when you're thinking or making decisions about what you're doing or what your organization is doing across the supply chain inside the organization, that it really gives you an opportunity to make the best possible decisions you can.
Hey, Mark,
Thank you.
team. Yeah, this is Chris. I'd like to add some additional feedback for the benefit of those that are on the phone. I've actually sent 2 of my folks through this training program, and it was really interesting. First of all, it's demonstrated the highest return on investment of any training program that we provided over the last 5 years. Now, I've only been there 18 months. We had our HR director look at all the other training that we provide, including Excel, basic training, et cetera. Highest return on investment that we've ever had over the last 5 years. And I've got Mark and Marko, you haven't heard this yet, but our shipping director went through the training. He had a limited academic background, loved the training. Based on the work that some of the projects that he's taken upon himself, and this is 2 weeks ago, we had him integrate some of the learning into a very large distributor that we work with across the country. And because of the work that he led a cross-functional team. It's a practical application of the stuff that he learned. We had 11% increase in service level and a 22% reduction on freight through some demand planning and cross-functional work that he provided and supported with other parts of our organization. So Mark and Marko, I haven't had an opportunity to share those numbers with you. I just got those numbers about 2 days ago, but it was significant. And again, I highly recommend it. In fact, I don't think there's any more important course that ISSA provides than this one.
Thank you, Chris. That's really, really great news to hear. Yeah, we are always happy to hear feedback like this, that what we are trying to do over here finds its way then also in the practical implications. That's great. So thank you.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions here from some attendees. This attendee says, I often hear the terms used interchangeably, but is there a difference between supply chain and logistics?
Okay, so I think this is a common kind of misperception that people have. Logistics tends to deal, primarily with, the physically distributing products, working with marketing to our customers. Supply chain management is a much broader kind of view, looking at not just the downstream kind of facing activities, but also the upstream supply network related issues. So it's a broader concept that really tries to tie these two perspectives together. Because if you only look at either the supply side or just the demand side, you can end up making some decisions which on first kind of thought, you think, okay, this is the right decision to make. But really, if you take the broader perspective, that's when you get the much more kind of optimal decision making. So, yeah, we hear this a lot. People talk about logistics and they're actually talking about supply chain management and vice versa. But there is definitely a clear difference between the two.
Thank you. And we've got another question here. A lot of supply chain management courses focus on the manufacturing industries. What or how much of the platform is specifically designed for distribution?
So that's a great question. Thank you. So the purpose of that meeting that we had in Chicago that I was mentioning earlier, just at the beginning of the presentation of the course, was really actually to dive deeper into the issues that distributors actually have. And if you look at the structure of the course, there is no operations module in. And the reason for it is that actually we designed this course on the back of the issues that distributors have reported to us rather than manufacturers. Now, that saying, if we have anyone in the audience from the manufacturing company, that doesn't mean that the course is not relevant for the manufacturers as well. It's absolutely it's relevant. It's just because the majority of the membership of ISSA our distributors, we said let's tweak it a little bit towards that majority of the audience, but still make it super relevant for the manufacturers as well. So the operations model is something that is at the moment not in, or it can follow in the future if we see that there is demand for it, but specifically this program is designed around the issues that distributors are experiencing.
Excellent. Couple more questions here. Is this program just for my employees working in a supply chain role?
Absolutely not. And we want to emphasize that sometimes companies forget that also people in, I would say, like non-traditional supply chain related functions, let's say such as procurement, logistics, or operations, have a very, very important and dramatic impact on the performance of a company. So if you look at, for example, sales and marketing people, so they're the ones who are the window into understanding our customers. Now, how effectively your company can respond to the customer needs is a function of how effectively the marketing and sales insights are translated in what has to be done in the rest of the organization and on the supply side. So we would highly recommend that anyone in the company that has the impact on the performance of a company in terms of its ability to serve the customer actually takes this course, because as we said earlier, customer relationship management is actually the first module, and it's where all the design decisions actually follow from. So to answer shortly, yes, absolutely, it is suitable also for other functions in the company.
Excellent. Another question here is asking, what will I learn from completing this program?
I mean, we're not trying to teach everyone, teach someone everything about supply chain management, because it's certainly a lot more involved, and typically you're looking at a number of years of education. It's to give people, as I say, I think we've mentioned before, the people that haven't necessarily had any formal kind of education in supply chain management, to give them that kind of integrated view of how to look at a lot of the day-to-day issues that they're doing, and to ensure that they're actually making decisions much more kind of optimally, rather than thinking about, for example, if we're just looking at logistics, we might be focused on minimizing our transportation costs. But if we're still trying to maximize the value that we add to customers, we have to think about that maybe we increase our cost, but by doing so, we're able to provide better levels of service to customers. Mm-hmm. So it's certainly it's not going to answer every single question you could possibly have about supply chain management, but it gives you a very good start and a very good kind of basis for actually moving forward with really understanding how to integrate supply chain management across the organization.
Excellent. We've got time for one last question, and the last question is there a volume discount for signing up multiple employees from within my company for this program?
The answer is yes, it is. And I believe that's going to be clarified in the email that ISSA is going to send out after this webinar. So for exact discounts, please contact the two people that were mentioned on the one before last slide, and they're going to give you exactly the degree of the insight. So TJ Grimm and Mark Wardner. So sorry, not degree of insight, but actually the actual discount based on the number of people that the company is trying to send in.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone so much for tuning in and listening to this amazing webinar. There was lots of information to learn. As they have said, an additional email will be sent out on pricing and discounts, so keep an eye out for that, and please sign up for this course online. It's going to change your business. Thank you to our presenters, And everyone, thank you very much for listening. Don't forget, you will receive a copy of this presentation within the week. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Bye for now.
Thank you very much also from our side.
Thank you. Bye.